Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
There's really like a full season's worth of material in this episode, like there, just in terms of the number of topics that appear. But the sort of dominant, or one, I would say the dominant topic is, what we call Chupat Niddah. What happens?
Wait, can I just stop you for a second? Can we tell everybody? I thought that he had watched the wrong episode because I was like 5 minutes in, and I said, "How do you not want to talk about this and this and this?" And he was like, just wait. There are going to be many other things that we could talk about, like mikvah and like 2 different beds and all of those kinds of things. But this is kind of the most prominent and maybe the more interesting of the.
And I'm hoping those will reappear. Again, I haven't seen part of them in this, so I don't know that they'll reappear. But I'm hoping they'll reappear because, we'll see. But the Chupat Niddah is a really challenging topic, and we were looking earlier at some of the sources around it. Actually, the Talmud talks about this case in Masechet Ketubot about if a woman is in Niddah at the time of is ritually impure at the time of the wedding, and Preslov got into, and dress code, right? There's just a lot of things.
It's a great episode. It's like the Yitro of the show, right? Like there's so much you could use.
Yeah, there's a lot. We
only have 1 week to talk about it. Yeah.
But when I saw the Niddah, it was like this is our topic because it's a really complicated one. It's not so complicated to avoid it, but if you don't avoid it, and what happens here happens, and it creates a whole lot of issues. Also, keep in mind, by the way, that halachically, when a woman is in a state of niddah, typically that lasts for 12 days. So it's not like we're talking a day or 2 days. We're talking 12 days. So it's there's like a pretty serious problem we're dealing. So anyway, so that's all.
We should have just taught Niddah.
Could also just teach Niddah, little by little, in pieces. We teach things in pieces, I guess. So that's our topic today, which again is sort of a big conversation here. And I mean, there's a lot of pieces that it's not just halachic, but there's also the questions of like, do you tell the rabbi? Do you like all these things that are going on here if this were to happen? And I totally understand them saying, we're just not going to tell the rabbi. But then, also pieces about like, they shouldn't actually be sleeping in the room together if they're, married in such a state. They shouldn't be in the yichud room together without another person there, right? Like there's just so many pieces here that make like every aspect of the wedding that the way you planned it no longer applicable.
You have to take 2 steps back because they can sleep in the same room in 2 separate beds if they were like in their 5th month of marriage
or their 2nd day of marriage.
Yeah, I was giving you a little bit more time there, but you have to explain why that night.
Yeah. So sorry, we talked about this earlier. There's generally we have the rules of yichud of prohibited seclusion, that a man and woman who are not married nor related to one another cannot be alone in a place together where they're secluded, where doors are closed, whatever, or something could happen. Now, typically, if there's a second woman or a second man, it's not really a big issue. It's not a big deal. It's not considered yichud. In this case, though, it's actually the case that we are the most strict about when it comes to yichud, seclusion, because of the fact that we know these people are attracted to one another, given the fact that they married one another, and the fact that we know that they have not had sex and are not currently allowed to have sex.
But they know that it's coming, so they're a little bit more excited. And the rabbis, a la everything else, the rabbis always think that they're not going to have any way of controlling themselves, even though they know that she's in Niddah, and so they need even more separation because sex is something that is kind of tangible, but not yet. It's closer than it ever has been. Anyway, continue.
Yeah.
I'll continue giving commentary to all of your stuff.
Sure. Was someone else chiming in there? Was that my imagination? No, that was just you. Okay. So this is a case where we're more strict. We say, the Talmud says that the man sleeps among the men and the woman sleeps among the women, which we understand to mean, they can't just have one additional person like if they're staying in the same apartment, they need at least one quote unquote chaperone of each gender to be with them. Also in the yichud room, the Ramah, the sort of main Ashkenazi posek, talks about how like they would stick kids in the room, and it's for that entire period of time duration that they're in Niddah, they would sort of like, hey, hang out with your nephew and niece. Why don't you go hang out with this couple for a few days, so that they're not alone together during the day, right?
Sorry. My favorite thing that I read about this was that someone would send in, you would have to know that the woman's in Niddah, but that someone would send in the waiter, sorry, I couldn't think of the English word, a waiter with champagne to do a l'chaim, because then all of a sudden there's someone else in the yichud room and they don't have to worry about being alone. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, so there's different ways. Rav Ovadia, the main, and I didn't bring this on the sheet that we looked at earlier, but Rav Ovadia, the main Sephardi posek, besides our Jewish law of recent time, talked about sort of stick a little kid in the yichud room. Rav Moshe Feinstein, who we saw, says, he deals with this case. He actually is responding to a question from his son, Rav David Feinstein, who passed away this past year, in which they say, like, the women, I have a case of the woman's embarrassed. She doesn't want people to know. And they say, tell one friend beforehand so that friend can sort of be hanging out in the yichud room.
Yeah.
Hidden. So like other people don't see them, not like hidden, but enough hidden that it's not visible to everyone else, but there's that one person there with them. It's not just the halachic piece. There's like a real recognition of the pastoral sensitivities around this, which has to, apply sort of across the board with issues related to Niddah. But particularly here on the wedding day where, something is now going, very much not according to their plan. Yeah, Norm.
And then we'll get back to Michael's question.
Oh, sure.
I just wanted to say that they did have that photographer come into the yichud room who was being a, very nudgy, interfering guy. And I turned to Rachel and I said, when we had yichud, they sure didn't do that.
Right.
But it also reminded me that the Rebbetzin Esther Jungreis, Aleva Shalom, who founded this, she was a Hungarian Rebbetzin in America who founded this movement she called Hineni, that was basically proselytizing among Jews to become more frum. I remember very clearly hearing her speak at one of the sessions I attended of hers, where she said that only the bride can set the wedding date. And I was somewhat confused at first, but the reason was that only the bride can predict when she'll be having her period and make sure that they don't schedule the wedding for the time when she's going to be Niddah. And obviously in this case, either that wasn't attempted or it just failed. But I also feel like, no, if she's in her 30s already and she's maintained her virginity this long, another week or a week and a half, not such a big deal.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what Hodaya says to her, right? She's like, it's just sex. Don't worry about it. Like, it'll happen later. You'll be fine. Just get on with it. Have a good wedding. Don't worry about it. But yeah, you're exactly
Norm,
right.
Would you say the same thing for the guy?
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely, yes. I mean,
in this case, he's also been married before, right? So that's
before,
the difference.
And, he's pursued that beyond the marriage a little bit, but he has shown himself to be a man who's able to wait, and so yes, I think he'd be able to do the extra week. After all, they're going to spend 1 or 2 weeks almost every month not having sex, so he can manage the extra week.
Right.
Maybe he can visit the hotel after the wedding.
Exactly. Maybe they can walk to the hotel now when they're out and walking around at night. So, yeah.
Denise, you have your hand up.
So, okay, 2 things. First thing is, a lot of the friends that I grew up with became very religious as adults. So when they got married, and now when their daughters are getting married, everybody went on the pill and had a 3-month engagement, and they knew when to set the wedding date. So I just wondered why that wasn't the case on the show. And then the other thing was, like, usually halacha is so concerned about how people feel, and there's so many stringencies to not embarrass, and you know, there's teachings that even in the Torah, when it writes about certain things, we write it in a backwards roundabout way to not insult like a bird who's not kosher. So why aren't there more safeguards against embarrassment in this situation? Like, why is Niddah so much more important than the absolute humiliation of however many hundreds of people knowing? I mean, it's just like, oh my God.
I mean, you know, so the first question, I think it's because it's a storyline, you know, like, right, right, it's a storyline of something that could happen. Again, we try really hard in premarital counseling to make sure that this doesn't happen. So like, right, that's the best way to not have this situation is to pre-plan. And, you know, as Norm was saying, the woman sets the wedding date, whatever, or you go on the pill. Again, even in Haredi circles, people go on the pill pre-wedding. There's no halachic issue with going on the pill pre-wedding because it's not functioning as birth control. They're not having sex. Right. So very common sort of across the Jewish world for people to go on birth control, women to go on birth control before the wedding in order to make sure things line up the way they're supposed to. But to that second question, what happens, you know, in this situation, for whatever reason, they didn't plan correctly or whatever, and, you know, and this happens, yeah, right, it's a huge issue. And so the question is, how can you do it so that it's not super embarrassing, right? So with yichud, that, you know, maybe you stick a friend in the room that no one notices. Maybe you know, the bride wears fancy gloves that look like they're part of the outfit, that, you know, and he puts the ring on top of the stuff, right? You're so like,
I'm thinking, God willing, one day I'll be a bride, and like any of those things would be mortifying because everybody knows what they mean.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And even if one person sees it, it's a Jewish wedding. All 500 people are going to know in 10 minutes.
Right.
So,
right. So,
you know, why isn't there more sensitivity to safeguard that?
Yeah, I'll answer as a woman. I think that just to save you a little, I think that there is something about what this story does in terms of them not deciding to tell the rabbi, or what I shared before of, you know, some halachic authorities saying, of course you can put that ring on her finger, just make sure you don't like hold her hand afterwards, right? That there's not gonna be so much touching that's gonna be a real problem. In terms of the ketubah, I've seen many in, you know, not from weddings, the ketubah, instead of just being handed straight to the woman, it gets handed to, you know, the other person so she can hand them their flowers. Like those kinds of workarounds, I don't think, even in the firmest of communities, would make you think, oh, she must be in Niddah. So there are workarounds. I mean, I think that's exactly what this episode is trying to show us. And people know about those workarounds and know that is exactly what you're getting at, which is it's not fair for a woman's body to decide now that an entire community is going to know whether or not I'm going to be sleeping with my husband at the end of this event. And so you're right, 100% right. And those are all the things that you would do. There's a ton of police activity outside my house, so I'm sorry if it's very loud. I'm not sure what's happening. Renee, you have your hand up.
So two things. One, I agree with Denise, but there is a lot of, you know, even in the best laid plans, if she were to go on birth control and they were trying to plan the date, I mean, all the nervousness and whatever, you can still, you know, all the best laid plans or whatever the rest of that thing, sentences. Mm-hmm. Number one. Number two, there are many situations in the halacha, from what I know, where certain situations are worked around so that embarrassment doesn't play a factor, right? Like if somebody goes to shake the hand of a religious man and the person is not aware that they're not allowed to touch, out of respect, he should shake her hand, right? Mm-hmm. And there are so many other situations where the religion works around puts in a fail-safe, that it doesn't make sense that when it comes to the wedding that it wouldn't put in a fail-safe too, because I mean, you can't exactly cancel a wedding, the day of, if you something happens to happen.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this is actually something, without talking about Niddah or talking about weddings, that's happening to people all the time right now, right? You have dreams of something. You have dreams of a bar mitzvah. You have dreams of the bris you're going to have for your child. You have dreams of these life cycles and how they're going to go. And then all of a sudden, something like, a pandemic happens, and you all of a sudden are dealing with a very different life cycle, and you have to create those workarounds. And so it's very similar. I hadn't thought about it until you actually just framed it this way, but it's very similar to this example, because what we're seeing in Yifat is not her disappointment that she can't hold his hand under the chuppah. Like, I think that is something that, like, you would be sad, sure, fine, maybe, but like you would get over it. But I think it's the general imagination of what the whole experience should have been like. He should have been able to hand me my ketubah. He should have been able to give me, the cup of wine after he drank from it without the rabbi having to drink it in between us, right? Those are moments that you never think about needing to implement until you're in the situation where you're thinking about it. And even talking to the rabbi, because they felt like if they had told the rabbi the truth, he probably would have said, it's not shayach, there's no wedding.
He wouldn't have canceled the wedding.
Yeah. There would have been a wedding.
Put on a glove, right?
There would have been a lot of things that you would have, like the ketubah would have gone to this person and then gone to her, and then the wine would have gone from the groom to probably the rabbi, then back to her. I mean, there's a lot of like workarounds here, but nothing would have gone from groom, man, I guess in this case, to woman. Except for potentially that ring if you are very careful to put it on her finger. Let me answer Michael's question, because now we've gotten like 6 questions deep past that question. And I'm curious to know what your dad actually would say to this question, though I think I know the answer to the Reform movement. So the question was, what would the conservative movement hold by this? If a woman who was getting married had her period, would we hold by the same halachot in terms of hilchot niddah, right? In terms of making sure that you're not touching, making sure that you are not passing things, all of that. So the truth in any good conservative Judaism discussion is maybe. It really just depends on the couple. It depends on if the couple is deciding to take on the laws of Niddah for them as a couple. It depends on if you know enough about all of these workarounds that we just talked about to get through the experience like Yifat and Amir did without having to tell anybody about it. It really just depends. As a conservative rabbi, I do similar to what I think Rabbi Pernick just mentioned, which is when I'm working with a couple, one of the things I mention is you might want to go to mikvah. And if you go to mikvah, you can't be on your period. So just let's try to not pick a date where that's going to be an issue. I will also say, just as a woman, most brides don't want to be on their period on their wedding. So Niddah or no Niddah, I think that most women have in their minds that they're not going to choose a day where if they look at their calendar, they're going to have to be worrying about that also. But that's just an aside. So I think in terms of the conservative movement, it depends. As a conservative rabbi, I don't go through the laws of Hilchot Niddah with a couple unless they are interested in going through them with me. It's not something that we impose on the couple as a matter of you must do this to get married. You must learn the laws. We don't do kala classes. I'll put it that way. So that's the difference. And in true conservative form, yeah, or no, or maybe and sometimes. Norm, do you have a question? You just have to unmute first.
There. Have either of you ever had this actually happen with a couple that you were going to marry?
So I've only done one wedding. And,
so have you?
No, so I mean, I talked I did one wedding. It was a friend. The kala, the bride, was a friend. And so I raised the topic months out of just like, by the way, mikvah, and she was like, yeah, I know, like she's not from, but her family, like her, they're Israeli.
She's a woman who's about to wear a white dress. Like
she's a woman, her family's Israeli, like they know, and she was like, yeah, don't worry about it. I'm like, we're talking to my mom, we know the drill. I was like, okay, great, and I didn't ask any further questions, which is like the appropriate, right? Like you're not supposed to like be checking in data of like, by the way, like. I raised it months in advance, and no one said anything different to me, so we're good.
And I didn't ask any further questions.
Well, I'm saying that because it actually is, in the Shulchan Aruch, he says something about like you shouldn't say something the day of, like the rabbi, like yeah, don't bring it up if it's not unless it's mentioned to you. Yeah, let it assume that people have figured it out. But if they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about, then you would have to actually talk about what are the rules for mikvah and so forth for Niddah mikvah generally.
I have done weddings and plural. And I've actually had this happen twice, but neither couple practices the laws of Niddah. And so it was much more an issue around my comfort and whether or not I was going to say, we'll pass the ketubah, but like they didn't care, nor did they really know. I don't think. Definitely one of the couples had no clue. The other couple maybe had a little bit of a clue, but
they just mentioned to you, like, by the way. Like,
I mean, again, like when you're a female rabbi, these things come up. Like it came up. Yes. Do you want me to tell you how? No. Okay. But yeah, the idea. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about with Rabbi Pernick for all of these reasons. But this is, it's a thing that comes up, I think, especially if there's like a close friend or if it's somebody who they want to understand the rules around, especially mikvah, right? If they get it the morning of and they're planning on going to the mikvah, do I still go? Obviously the answer is no. Can I go to another body of water? Sure, fine. But so yes, it has happened to me twice, but again, not through like the laws of Hilchot Niddah, just more so again, women getting married, not wanting to have their period on their wedding day. Rebecca or Leonard, or both.
Hi. Yeah, we're going to speak in unison. We have so much in common. So in the show, Yifat has her period the day of.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming that it wouldn't be any different had this happened a day or two before. I mean, everything else would be the same, right?
Yeah, the only thing that she kind of avoided was that she had already been to mikvah. So she was able to get that in rather than not being able to. But yeah, in terms of practice and in terms of things that they had to kind of wade through, no pun intended, everything would have been the same, right, Rabbi Pernick? I'm talking a lot today, much more than you are. Does that
yeah, no, that's true, right? You're right. There wouldn't be a practical difference other than, like you said, the fact that in this case she went to mikvah that morning of, which is kind of like part of the envisioned wedding. Whereas if she had, gone on her period 3 days earlier, she wouldn't have been able to go to mikvah at all. But other than that, there wouldn't be a change.
Is a woman in Niddah allowed to go to the kotel and touch it, or go to synagogue? What in terms of?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, generally the idea is that like also like ritual items like a Torah can't absorb impurity. So this comes up in Orthodox context a lot about one of the reasons if you go to a more, say, centrist to right-wing Orthodox synagogue, they'll say, why don't we pass the Torah around to the women's side? Oh, it's because some of them might be in Niddah and touching the Torah in Niddah. Like the Torah can't absorb Tuma because it's the Torah. So, I mean, the kotel, similarly, like a woman who's in Niddah touching the kotel does not make the kotel become tameh. So those things going to show all of that is, it's fine, but like certain things that are very annoying, like passing keys back and forth and, passing cups back and forth, are problematic. So, Robert asked if the Niddah issues comes up at a Reform wedding.
I just told your dad that he should mention it. So we did that at the same time. Great.
Robert obviously has ESP and is wasting his talents on whatever it is he does with his life, because that was real. I really thought that was like a follow-up from you. So it's amazing. It's not a question that comes up. I mean, it's really something that, obviously this year, as was mentioned, I've had a lot of brides or couples who had their, the wedding that they imagined transformed or postponed or, whatever. But Niddah is, other than on occasion when it comes up, and as Rabbi Schatz said, I'm sure it comes up more naturally with a woman rabbi than with a male rabbi. There have been a few cases over the years. I also have officiated at plural weddings since I was ordained in 1982. So yeah, I've done a few. But I have mentioned to a few brides when somehow it did come up. You may want to make sure in terms of your monthly timing, setting the date of the wedding. And I had never heard that before, but it's actually very interesting about the bride being the one to set the date. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
But Niddah is not an issue that is really dealt with in Reform Judaism, other than, going to the mikveh, which some brides will choose to do.
Right. Other questions, thoughts, comments? Anybody want to talk about the two separate beds? Yeah, Debbie.
So I thought it was an interesting parallel that poor Yifat, she couldn't have sex on her wedding night, and there's Hodiah having sex on Yifat's wedding night.
After saying, I haven't done anything, tell me how it is, and then, right, that was very interesting. So we can talk about the two beds. Hold on. Karen has her hand up.
I was thinking of another thing.
Yeah.
At the hospital when, what's his name's mother dies, he's on this side and they're on that side. The family. And that's how I imagine him in terms of relationship. Okay. End of mine.
That's the doctor and you coming out. I really loved the moment where she was veiled at the wedding and the mother was not unveiled, but like the sheet over the deceased mother was brought back. I thought that was a really beautiful way of showing those two moments in the cinematography. Other thoughts or questions or comments about Niddah? Rabbi Pernick, plural weddings. Oh.
Yeah. No, he means plural weddings as in more than one wedding. More, He's
been out in the world as a rabbi longer than the other Rabbi Pernick and myself.
Yeah, correct. I have done plural of other lifestyle.
I have never officiated at a wedding with more than one bride and one groom.
No, that's not true.
At the same time.
You've had multiple brides or multiple grooms.
Not at the same chuppah.
Sure. You've done same-sex weddings.
That's true. Okay, yes. Thank you. It's been a while. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah.
More than one rabbi. Yeah, totally. You can definitely have more than one rabbi.
Oh, sure.
My parents actually got married at Temple Beth Am by 4 rabbis, and they just took turns doing things, which there's not that many things. So they just did different things under the chuppah. But yeah, you can definitely have more than one rabbi. Anytime that you want Rabbi Pernick and I to do a wedding together,
we had 2 rabbis.
I will have a lot of fun with that.
We had 2 rabbis and 2 chazanim at Beth Am.
At your wedding, yeah.
For the record, I would be honored to co-officiate with Rabbi Schatz. So.
Thanks.
yeah, Arnie.
I've got a question. Actually, Rabbi Pernick, for the senior Rabbi Pernick. How common in the Reform movement is it right now for the what is the room, the yichad, where you go into the Yehud? We did it for our wedding as Reform congregants, but I'm wondering how common it is. Of course, we had a very traditional wedding with the bride marching around the groom and also But I'm just curious how common that may be today.
So I think it's pretty standard. I mean, what I tell every couple is, look, you're dealing with Jewish people. I mean, forget about the pandemic. You're dealing with Jewish people, and in most cases, you've got a cocktail hour. So even your parents, if there's a choice between the hors d'oeuvres or greeting their child who's newly married, the parents are going to pause. That's a tough one, right? So I tell every single couple, take your 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever you want. The bride has to be bustled or debustled or I've still never figured out what exactly that is.
Right,
whatever. I just know it's something that needs to be done.
Yeah, not good. Yeah.
And I just say, you're going to be spending the whole day or the whole night with all these people. Enjoy the first 15, 20 minutes of your married life together. It's the only privacy you're going to have the rest of the day and the night. So, and they do, and they appreciate that because, cocktail hours go on way too long anyhow. So even if they took half an hour, So I think most people do that. I'm not familiar with people really doing like receiving lines after a wedding or, occasionally people go right from the ceremony right to the reception. But I at least in my own personal experience, which is really all I can talk about, virtually everybody has some type of yichud, which, as I've, come to learn, does not necessarily mean what most people think it comes to mean.
Right.
I mean, what most people think yichud is all about is not what's really happening in that room.
Right. So, right. It's, and this is the idea of, right, and this actually came up when we were talking about Chupat Niddah, what happens if they, they got married, but before they were intimate with one another, she, had her period. And the truth is, halakhically, we don't actually care if they had sex. We just care that they were alone together long enough that they could have had sex. And so that's sort of why the first thing immediately once we're done with the chuppah is go to the yichud room, in the yichud room together 10 minutes. Like, after that, it doesn't matter if they have sex. Like, we don't actually care about whether they, quote unquote, consummated the marriage, but they halakhically did because they were alone long enough. And right, most people, again, as we saw in this episode, there's a tradition to fast on your wedding day. So if you're getting married not first thing in the morning, like, people are thirsty and are hungry, and they know that they're going to be dancing and jumping, right? Like, so it's also like a chance to just, usually there's a nice spread in there and like have some water, have some food, relax, like, yeah. So one of my good friends was adamant that they were going to do the yichud room the right way. So I wondered, it was like, that was, where they actually did, they were like, we are having sex in the yichud room, we're doing it. But that was like his thing, he and his wife, but like generally it's not done. So, I mean, it can be done, but it's generally. So.
I hope that they listen to this podcast. Okay.
Podcasts there.
Great. That was just an intimate story. Okay. Rebecca and Leonard. And then the one thing I was going to say is that I also think that Jewish weddings have just become a thing that people assume that they know what's happening, and it starts with this and it ends with this, and then you go into this room to be alone, to eat and drink and bustle my dress, right? And I think that across the movements, whether or not you know the terminology for all of those pieces, that kind of seems to be standard, even for the most secular of people getting married in today's day, which is the only time that I can speak for as being a rabbi. But they tend to kind of know the steps, even if they don't know why. They've seen enough weddings that they know that the bride and groom get kind of hustled into this other room where they get to be alone for a little while. Okay, Rebecca and Leonard.
Okay. All right, so two things. Number one is that we fasted on our wedding day, but it was a very hot day. It was like, 103 or something in the valley. And so I fasted all the way until just before the chuppah, where I decided it was probably better for me to have a drink of water than to faint under the chuppah. And so that's number one. Number two, a few years ago, we went to a wedding of one of our Haredi cousins in Muncie, New York. Mm-hmm. And after they broke the glass, after the wedding ceremony was over, something happened which I've never seen in another wedding. And that was everybody kind of rushed up to the stage, up to the front to congratulate the bride and the groom rather than letting them get away for the first few minutes there. That just seemed very counterproductive or counterintuitive.
Did they run up to the bride and groom and then take them into the yichud room, or they just stayed up there at the chuppah?
No, they stayed up there at the chuppah, and they were there for a while. I don't know, 10, 15 minutes or something before they, allowed the couple to escape from the room.
That's why we usually have the band up there, and the band, as soon as the imesh kachek glass is broken, like right away into right, and then like.
Well, I mean, I assume that's their cousin. I mean, obviously they know the rules, so I assume that's their custom to do that.
But yeah. This also is a community where, as we found out on our bus ride there were several weddings that night. Multiple people go to different weddings. So there were multiple things going on. And in the RSVP for this wedding, there were like at least 3 different levels of RSVP that you could do. I'm going to come to the chuppah only. I'm going to come to the dinner. I'm going to come to the, the reception before the wedding, so there were various levels. So maybe people who went to congratulate weren't going to be staying and going to the dinner.
Yeah, for sure. Rabbi Pernick.
Yes.
No, not you.
Oh, my dad is
in Israel. What's that?
No, I didn't realize your hand.
I was calling on you, but he answered.
Okay. He wasn't paying attention. I pay attention to you. When Josh's cousin Ohad was getting married a couple of years ago, and we were at the wedding. Now, this is both, I assume the bride. I don't know the bride. The groom's family certainly are very, very chiloni, totally secular. And they were married in a beautiful area outside of Tel Aviv. Of course, everything was strictly kosher, which we were very pleasantly surprised at. And when I asked, the wait staff, and they said, "Oh, no, everything's glot here," but the people weren't. But it was beautiful and all of that. And they had their Chabad rabbi, because you need an Orthodox rabbi in Israel. And ceremony's over, and exactly as was described, we were very surprised. Everybody from the congregation rushed the chuppah.
Wow.
And the couple stayed there. So it was, they weren't doing the, Shama and the rest of that. So we were surprised, but we went up. I mean, we would have been the only ones sitting. So.
Wow. I know that there's a thing, and I don't know where it's from, but I know there's a thing about going under the chuppah and giving a bracha or getting a bracha or something, that if you're under someone's chuppah, that's supposed to bring you
But that was sort of referred to in the episode.
Yeah. Well, I know that in terms of getting brachot from the bride and groom for sure, but supposedly I've seen a lot of people do it, taking even a little bit of the wine from the cups that are used and drinking them and then saying a bracha under the chuppah. I've seen it at most of the weddings that I've done, and I never knew about it until I was officiating weddings. Mm-hmm. Yeah, really interesting. So it's possible that that's also part of it in Israel. I have no idea.
Yeah, and the brachas, usually that's more pre-wedding, the giving the blessings. But yeah, it's really these things. It's also with at a bris, the sandak. People come and get a bracha from the sandak. There's sort of these. What the Breslov guy was saying about, a king, you're like a male king, so there's sort of that idea of also at the bedekin, people coming to the bride to get blessings.
And interesting that the formula for brachot was a mishaberach, which is also really interesting. I think that if you were to say to someone in America, give me a blessing, I don't know if they would actually go to mishaberach. And I don't know, that was a fascinating, not enough for a whole class, but it was a fascinating thing that kept on recurring in the episode that I thought was really interesting, that people actually had verbiage for how to come up with a blessing just on the spot. And that's not something that I see many people including rabbis who have to sit at people's bedsides and come up with brachot, on the spot. It's often difficult for people, and it seemed to come very naturally to Amir and to Yifat. Hold on one second, Michael, because Renee had her hand up, and then we'll call on you next.
I just was going to say that it's the same thing as what you're saying. Like when the Kala goes to the hotel with a list of friends of hers that she has that are not yet married to do a special bracha. Idan had a friend from Aish that did it for all of the Aish friends that were single. She took all the names, men and women that were single. One of my favorite lines in the episode was when Hodaya said, "You don't think God's going to know me if you just say Hodaya?" And for her to have to say, "No, I'm going to give you my full name, and you're gonna remember it, and you're going to say it." Okay, Michael.
Just the only point I wanted to make is you mentioned a Misha Berach. That's a tefillah that we say when you have an aliyah. So that seems to make sense.
Well, sort of the intro, right? The intro of the Misha Berach Avateinu Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov. May God who blessed them, may you bless this person, and may you give him X, Y, and Z. Right. So it's a formula that works. The alternative is kind of the Yehi Ratzon. May it be your will. That right. Those are kind of the two main ways to sort of start spontaneous blessings, I would say.
To me, it's just surprising that they even knew to use that as spontaneous blessing, right?
I'm Sephardim do blessings a lot. No, it's true. Like Sephardim do blessings. It's like a thing that they do much more than Ashkenazim do.
Oh, okay.
So yeah.
Rabbi Pernick, because you were so excited about the topic and we have a little bit of time, would you like to venture into the 2-bed topic?
I imagine it'll reappear.
Okay.
No,
we don't have to. It's up to you.
The 2 beds. I feel like that's more of like a married, Niddah while married kind of topic, whereas this one is more like Niddah when getting married topic. So I imagine we'll get into that kind of stuff.
Okay. Well, you just had a very nice, everyone just had a very nice window into, we will talk about that at some point.
Just like we talked about mikvah back before we talked about, single women in mikvah, all these things. Little by little over the course of, 2 seasons, you end up getting you learn. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So.
Okay. Any other thoughts, questions?
I had a thought that was not really related to that, but I think that with the rabbis who are present, that, you had Nati, who is at the wedding, and, he's got to serve as an aide. Right? Very, very big honor, very important thing. And he gets the call that, his mom is dying. And, he's got to make one of those decisions. And to me, where that hit me, and I don't know about with you, is just in terms of missing out on something that is, really, really important in one's life because of one's career. That's, in this particular case, he makes a decision, and he goes to his mom after she's dead, and he says slicha. It's like, what can he do? But you can't have that moment over again. And sometimes you have those just really, really tough choices.
Totally, yeah. And I think there's also sort of this kibud avim, right? He should have gone earlier. Is the truth. He should have, when his brother was calling. When he's first getting the call the first time when they're hiking. We assume it's the hospital calling just because it's a ship, right? That's sort of how they do it.
Because he also says, I've been there every day.
I've been there every day, right? And then you realize what's going on, and he should have left. He should have been with his mom, right? Yeah. But I think, I think there's complicated emotions. He also, I think, doesn't want to, leave Amir because obviously he has a history with Ifat, and he doesn't want it to seem like I can't handle you marrying Ifat, right? I think that's a piece that's going on very strong, right? Even the fact that his mom wanted so much more than anything in the world for him to get married, and now it's like the woman who he could have married's wedding day, right? There's all of these things that are all.
I did not think about any of that at all. Cool. That is much more thinking into this than I did. Wow, that's a good point, though. Yeah, Rabbi Barbara.
Well, it seems to me that they are such good friends, they're roommates, that he wouldn't share that his mother is dying with Amir, who of course is much more compassionate than Nati, and so he would have insisted that Nati be with his mom. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that it's typical of Nati to not include people in his life.
I mean, I think what it also does is it makes Amir think, oh, Nati's just being immature, right? Like, whereas if he said, look, my mom's really sick, she's in the hospital, she's dying, I'm really sorry. Like, but he doesn't want to have those kinds of tough conversations. Totally. Yeah, very much Nati being. How about Denise?
So I took it as that Nati was being really sensitive. And that he didn't want to ruin Amir's wedding day or even the days leading up to it. I don't think he imagined that his mom would pass on that particular day.
Right.
So he didn't foresee the conflict. But I think my sense of it was that he didn't want to kind of take away from his friend's joy. And I felt really sad for him that when he wasn't there for the ketubah, that everyone's going to go, oh yeah, he's just irresponsible. And,
Right.
And like here he was, and in a very different moment than what they were all thinking.
Right, and I think that's part of. I mean, obviously it's a TV show, and so they want us to do exactly that: is to feel badly for the fact that everyone is assuming something about him because his character for an entire season was one way, and now he seems to be showing some kind of compassion, or at least creating. Almost new rules for himself about what takes precedent, and he goes after being with family. But yeah, I agree with you. I think in that moment, it's too bad that people assumed the worst of what he could have been doing or not doing, right? And he was really taking care of something very important. Renee, and then we will.
One of the things that really bothered me also with regards to friendship was when the two girls went to the hotel. And the lady asked her to, first of all, I'm sure she knew growing up that she needed to wear a dress or a skirt to the hotel.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. But she didn't happen to be wearing it or whatever. But the fact that she refused to do that, it really bugged me, because here's her best friend getting married. Like, is it going to kill you to put on a skirt to go with your best friend to the hotel for 2 seconds? It's not going to take away from your wanting to become more chiloni. It's showing that, you're thinking about your friend more than you're thinking about yourself in this few minute period.
I felt
because she said last week, though, she said last week, I have to be really serious about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I felt
when they were talking about how are they going to do the apartment.
I felt exactly the same way. And I think that just like everything, we don't know what's going to be a trigger for somebody, and we don't know what's going to kind of set them over the edge in terms of being uncomfortable or being put into a situation that now all of a sudden is taking them back to a time that made them unhappy, or we don't know. And so I thought that I agree with you that she should have just put it on and walked down there. But I actually thought that the compassion came from Yifat in allowing her to not go down with her. That she was such a good friend that she realized, okay, I'm not going to push that button, right? If you know someone well enough, you know how to not get them to that ledge, because you don't want to fall over it with them. You want to let them just handle it on their own. And I think that was very kind of her and very compassionate of her. Karen had her hand up, and then
it's when what's his name got the phone call and said, I've been there every day. I asked for time off. I thought it was the hospital calling him for his duties, his rounds. Mm-hmm. So it really was his brother, or the second phone call was the brother?
I think the first one was also his brother. I think it's made to appear that it's the hospital calling him, but it's actually, I think we sort of realized from the second call it is actually his brother. And he's sort of saying, I just need a day. Yeah. So it's sort of done in that way that you don't realize what's happening at first. I just want to, I'll add, not that I really have anything to add on it. My dad asked about the whispering into the ear of the deceased. The guy who says you need to whisper in the ear. So I don't.
It's such an Israeli thing, by the way, to come to the hospital room where someone has died and be like, "Let me tell you something you got to do right now," and you have to do it.
Yes.
And I know better than you do, so let me tell you what to do.
Yes.
Anyway, continue.
Yes, very Israeli. I mean, there's all kinds of things, like when someone passes away, we open the window, right? There's all these kinds of, so that the soul can leave, right? So there's like different things that we do. That thing about the whispering so that the angel doesn't get confused or whatever, like that's not a thing I'd ever heard. But there's so much stuff related to, especially in those like first hours after someone has passed away, about the soul, making it the smoothest transition possible for the soul in leaving the body. So yeah, that wasn't I had not heard of that particular custom. The guy seemed very smart, like very Sephardi. Even what he says after, when he's leaving, he says, "Mina shamayim yinachamu," which is the Sfar, right? Ashkenazim say, "Hamakom yinachem etchem," right? And that's the Sephardi formulation of that. So you sort of get the sense it's right. And generally speaking, Sephardi Jews, their Judaism is sort of more. There's more of like the mystical, spiritual kind of stuff in there. So things like whispering to the dead and visiting graves of this, like all that's sort of more a part of that kind of Judaism. But yeah, it's not a thing. Even you talk about the fast, the fasting. When Nati's like, "I'm here, you're Sephardi," you don't, so you don't need to do that. So I think was that fasting or not talking? I think we're fasting. Mm-hmm. So yeah, but that particular custom I hadn't heard of. But you sort of get a glimpse into a lot of different pieces of ways that there's all kinds of practices in minhagim that some of them, you might not have even never heard of on these topics. Hopefully episode 2, matches, like I said, there's a lot in one episode. So hopefully
episode 2 has 2 beds so that we can go back.
Has 2 beds so we can talk about 2 beds. Yeah, exactly. So we'll see where things lead us next week. But thank you all for joining. It's great to have you all.
See y'all soon.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.